Just fucking do it. Subscribe now.
Take it away, kid.
All right. So the plan for the day is to go over each of our cases. Go make one round. So each of us brought cases, right? The agenda that we have for today is the follows. I will start off and present my case with you guys. We'll give each one of us 30 minutes for the day. And then we should be done at 12:30 with you.
It shouldn't take 30 minutes, but anyway.
It should not.
You'll get better at it.
Yes, sir. And then lunch is at 1. So I will first introduce myself, explain what I've been doing. And then once you guys come on board, you guys can explain yourself and share your industry, and then you can talk about your case. Sounds like a plan?
Okay.
So my name is Adil Quresh. I'm a dentist in United States. I practice in Maryland. That's pretty close to Washington, D.C. Prior to that, I was in the Air Force. I actually separated from the Air Force in October this year. I was a dentist for the Air Force. I worked at the Pentagon. And I was also an intelligence officer, did so many other responsibilities with the Air Force. I met Mr. Peña in April of 2018 in South Carolina.
Correct.
And I came in uniform that day.
Correct. Yes, you did.
I left base and came down. We had a wonderful meeting, and I made a promise to him that if he was having a seminar after I completed my training, I would be there. And Winnica emailed me and told me that there's an opening, and the next thing I know, I am at the Castle Seminar the following August in 2018. And I just remember it as if it was yesterday. And it's been now 4.5 years ever since. And as I am sitting here now, listening to everything Mr. Peña is saying, I can resonate through experience. And the first time he said it, I just took notes. I couldn't really appreciate, but now I really do appreciate, and I'm sure you do as well. So I'll speak to you about one of the deals that I did, the one deal I did. But before I did this deal, there was a failed deal that I had. Now, I'll explain the context here. At the time, it was a record of how fast the deal was closed. There were 2 dental practices in Northern Virginia, and the seller was a middle-aged Irani dentist whose father passed. He was mourning, and he just was not motivated to do dentistry anymore, and he wanted to sell his business, get the cash, and just move somewhere else. And he was having marital problems with his wife, who was an alpha wife, and he was more of a beta male, and too much complications in his personal life and business. He just wanted an exit. Now, the problem was his what we call creative accounting. Are you guys familiar with that term? Where very common, where business owners, small business owners, they manipulate the books to minimize their taxes, but if your tax returns are not honest and accurate, the banks will not.
Yes, they put the money cash in the pocket and they put it in the books.
Correct. So they list expenses, personal expenses, onto their tax returns, which are not actually true expenses. And if you are not cash flow positive, the banks will not provide you a loan for those practices. So one way or another, we moved heaven and earth. We got those deals to the finish line. The bank that I was using at that time was Citibank, and they were motivated to get the deal done. Now, right before we were signing off the deal, there was a question that was brought up to me by the banker, and the banker said, "You are an active duty dentist. How are you going to be managing these 2 practices? How are you going to be driving the revenue at these practices if you're a full-time dentist at the Air Force?" I said, "Well, have you not heard of anyone doing 120 hours a week?" And that is a concept very foreign to bankers.
Absolutely.
And they were not convinced of that because they had a risk. If they were going to lend a multi-million-dollar loan, they had a fear that what would happen if you were deployed? You had about 3 years left on service. What would happen if I was deployed and the businesses were, I was absent? There was too much of a risk. They pulled out from the deal. They did say, thank you for your service, which is absolutely useless. Pulled out of the deal. And the next week or two, I was so, how can I say this? My enthusiasm was diminished because we put so much energy. We had building up the board, getting the first board meeting, getting the deals, doing the underwriting, getting through all that work. And at the very last minute, the banks pulled the deal. But I would say what I learned from that moment was my board of directors came together and they lifted me up, gave me energy to keep pushing. And I didn't expect that, actually. I mean, I hired the best or got the best people I could. But when the deal didn't go through, I thought that I have let my team down. But circumstances beyond my control, the team came to me and rallied and raised my spirits once more. And then we took another attack and we closed this deal. That was shortly thereafter. You guys with me so far? That's the context where I'm coming from. That's my background. So I'll share this deal with you, my deal number one. It was started in, the seller was gone, but he came back. We started in October 2019, and we closed in December 31st at the 5 o'clock business hour of the last day of the year. We closed it on the 31st. I took over operations on January the 2nd. January 1st, everybody was non-operational. We took over on the 2nd. So the motivated seller, as you know, and the QLA model, number one, motivated seller. Number two, cash flow positive. And number three, the cash flow must meet the debt service. Debt service being the loan or wherever you're going to get your financing at. So let's talk about number one, the motivated seller. The seller was a 35-year-old Indian male, which is a bit young to be unmotivated. But this dentist had 2 dental practices. He had a lot of issues with his staff, all black females, attitude ghetto, and he overpaid them. And the reason why he overpaid them for substandard work was because he couldn't get anyone else. Poor leadership, poor management, and he was getting a lot of lawsuits from his patients because he was mistreating them. And by the way, he lost his license last year. The safety, there were too many rats in his practices from the other practice that he had. The safety commission came in, inspected the site, shut it down, and gave him a chance to reopen it. He still had the same problems. They shut it down and took away his license. So now he is not even practicing dentistry. But one of the lessons that I learned from this gentleman was that there's always skeletons in the closet. No matter how forthcoming they are, sellers, I'm sure as you know, have secrets that they don't want to disclose to you at the deal. And I learned that from my legal team, it's always better to be forthcoming at the early stage of the conversations. Say as much as you can, forget your insecurities, share as much as you can so that you can work through the problems later on. Don't bring the problems at the end of the deal. Just bring it at the end so that you know whether it's going to be a deal or no deal. So this guy had a lot of problems. He had management problems. He had clinical problems. He had lawsuits. He was young. He was burnt out. He was not interested, and he wanted an exit. So was he a motivated seller? At the time, I think he was motivated enough to do the deal. I don't think he met your criteria for motivation of being having a stroke and bleeding, and wife having cancer. But it was enough to get enough to pique my interest and start the process moving forward. Before I did this deal, in my previous failed acquisition, I learned how the banks did underwriting. So, are you familiar with what underwriting is? Yes or no? Just give me no.
Yes.
No. Okay. So, when I give you a deal, you're a banker, you will take a look at the deal and crunch numbers. Like, what is the cash flow? How much interest and principal? What's the premium going to be? Will he be able to pay back my loan? So they do underwriting. That's the process called underwriting. They look at the deal and crunch out the numbers. Okay. And if the deal makes sense, they'll give you a term sheet. They'll offer you a loan. Okay. So I learned how that worked. And I was having very straightforward conversations with the bankers, like, okay, how do you do underwriting? And some of them gave me their templates from their Excel sheets. I just asked, could you send me your underwriting Excel sheet? And I took that Excel sheet, and I'm going to show you how they do it. And I used it to underwrite this deal before I even presented it to the bank. It took me about an hour to crunch all the numbers, all the tax returns in, and then if it worked well, then I would just forward it to the banks, and I knew the banks were going to offer me a term sheet. In the dental world, in the United States, banks will give you 80% of their cash flow. So let's say if a practice is making $1 million, the banks will give you automatically $800,000.
But 1 million EBITDA or 1 million turnover?
Gross revenue.
Okay.
Yeah. So top line revenue. If you're making $1 million, the banks would loan up to $800,000 if it meets the debt to service ratios, right? So the first thing they do,
I'll see you guys later.
yes, sir. Thank you. Okay. So the revenue